Welcome to another Boom Room exclusive interview. I am Carmelo from Arcanum Ventures, and I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Sasha Asheghi. And today we'd like to welcome Dr. Raullen Chai, co founder of MachineFi Labs and IoTeX, a layer one centered around Internet of Things and DePin. Thank you for joining us today, Raullen. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Super excited to talk about what do we do and how's Deepin going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you're probably bored to death of answering this question, and it's kind of standard format for interviews these days. But could you just like run us through what you've been working on, how you got into crypto in the first place? I know a little bit about it, but like I for our viewers, just what your journey's been like to get into crypto and what you were doing
For sure.
before this. So
Yeah, for
thank you.
sure. Yeah, I was born in Asia, but I did my school in Canada, right? So U Waterloo, where I did my PhD. So my PhD was all about cryptography. So that's where I got into Bitcoin very naturally, right? Because Bitcoin design was something kind of considered as too good to be true at that time, 2008, 2009 ish. That's where I got into Bitcoin. I'm a very early kind of comer to the game, to the crypto game. And after my graduation, so there's no such a thing called the crypto industry, right? So Bitcoin
Mm,
is still like, I don't know, maybe a few $100. So that's why I joined like Google, stayed there for 5 years. That's where like I moved to San Francisco Bay Area, and still I'm here right now. So yeah, so stay in Google for 5.5 years, maybe leading teams for infra and security. Then moved to Uber during its like a super hyper growth stage. So that's where I got lot of knowledge about deeping, right? So it doesn't call deeping in the early days, but this sort of like sharing economy have some spirit in the deeping space as well. So Uber another 2 year. Then actually, I started IoTeX with two other co-founders, Kevin and Jin, in the year of 2017 year end. Wow, how time flies. So it's almost 7 years. So we're
It's
still kind of
wild.
talking about the same thing here. Yeah.
The IoTeX network is home to an ecosystem of dApps, tokens, and services that connect the physical and digital worlds. By bringing real-world data to blockchain, IoTeX enables an entirely new category of use cases where users can earn digital assets based on their real-world data and actions. All types of machines can be registered to IoTeX and deliver facts about the real world to the blockchain, a concept we call proof of anything. From proof of activity to fuel decentralized healthcare, to proof of safety to settle insurance contracts, to proof of green energy to fuel renewable energy marketplaces. Real-world data will change everything for blockchain and spark a new era of innovation on IoTeX. With IoTeX, we can unlock liquidity for real-world assets and create brand new digital assets that will flow freely across our network of on-chain applications, information markets, and mining farms. And thanks to cross-chain bridges to Ethereum, Binance Smart Chain, and other top blockchains, our digital assets will interoperate with the blockchain universe for endless possibilities. Join our global community of pioneers and help shape the future decentralized economy. Welcome.
That's
I wanted
yeah.
to I wanted to ask you actually. Back in the day, you were talking about joining Google and Uber. Was there any discussion about cryptography, cryptocurrency, or Bitcoin in those early days in some of these larger institutional companies?
No, surprisingly, no, it's not, right? So even right now, if you ask like a random Googlers on the street, do you know Bitcoin? Do you know what is cryptocurrency? Do you know DePin? Do you know DeFi? Do you know NFT? The answer is most likely no. So those people, so although they are standing in front of like cutting edge of technology, so they have like a very minimized like exposure to crypto world at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if that's a result of some of these larger publicly traded corporations being like super strictly compliance focused and business focused versus thinking about like maybe if we can add some risk, we can add some benefits in other ways. But that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing.
I feel like the reason being like the cryptocurrency has almost a very unique culture, right? It's sort of like a digital nomad culture we're talking about, or like a utopia culture we are talking about even before we start the show. While lots of like let's say Google, Facebook, or Uber engineers, like a PMs, designers, so they have like a different kind of mindset. They're thinking about, oh, how should I serve like a 1 million, 1 billion like people in the world by providing some sort of like a product, a better services here and there. So it's kind of like an orthogonal mindset.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that. We posted like one of the a few interviews ago. It was with a gaming company in Web3, and once you leave the little bubble of crypto, you see how rabid people are about either hating it completely or not wanting to know anything about it. And it's understandable to a certain extent. There's not the best reputation for crypto still, but and at the same time, it makes sense for some of these big companies to at least explore the opportunity to integrate certain aspects of Web3 into their companies because their competitors are likely doing that. So we're starting to see that now with gaming
Right.
companies or telecom companies or whatever, any industry, they're looking at this as a potential avenue, probably like they did with the internet back in the dot-com bubble or a little bit after that.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like another reason is like a crypto is very finance driven right now. So there's a reason why most of the crypto startups in US they're on the East Coast, right? Because they're closer to the capital, to Wall Street, to where the money is. Compared to on the West Coast of US, it's mostly like a builders, engineers, researchers. So they're like a very technology driven,
Hmm.
but they have a very limited knowledge about finance. So that's perhaps another reason.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. I think I don't know if I could ever imagine Google bringing in decentralized governance into anything. Like that seems like some
Why would they
kind
do
of
that?
strange world, right? But it's funny to imagine. And fast forward to your time after Uber and stepping into the idea or the concept behind IoTeX that was inspired by, I think, your experience there. You mentioned the idea of back then no one called it DePin, and Carmelo and I kind of hate this term. And I think we're gonna dive into that a little bit. Like it's such a it's like overused, it's bastardized, and then I think back then maybe they were referring to things like that more of like Internet of Things, IoT,
Right.
decentralized like consensus networks. But what was the main driving vision around IoTeX? Like what big gaps did you see throughout your work experience that you realized, I can maybe like help solve some of these problems?
Yeah, I'm coming from this Silicon Valley high tech company background. So in my heart, I still have this kind of dream or hope about bringing crypto to the massive users, right? So that's why we think, okay, maybe IoT has been the bridge between the Web 2, Web 3 space. So that's where some magic should be happening here. Um, so of course, at the very beginning, so we talk about like a IoT and blockchain, but IoT and blockchain, so they have like a three generations of like a narratives, right? So that's another interesting topic to talk about. The first, like the narrative in the IoT blockchain space was all about like a micropayment. People think about, oh, blockchain is such a good ledger, right? So let's, having all the devices in the world do the micropayment to each other, so we can have the overall like a blockchain. So I think during that time, like we were born, IOTA was born, and there are a few kind of IoT focused blockchain was born. Turns out this narrative sounds really good, but nothing can be done, right? So it's still like too early. Then the second narrative, after the first one, is around privacy. Then people says, oh, device producing a lot of data, right? So your home camera, your car, everyone is producing data. Then blockchain can provide some sort of like a OS or like a end-to-end encryption, privacy preserving computation, right? So those technology can be powered by the blockchain. So let's apply those things to the device world. So you can have like a you own your data, you own your device, you own your data type of thing, right? So we did some work over there. I think there are some other projects did some work over there, but unfortunately, no one really cared about the privacy. That's a hard
Hmm.
lesson we learned from this project we
Yeah,
did in
strangely
2021,
enough.
right? So although they talk about, oh, we love privacy, but no one really care about it. Then the third one is actually like a deeping, which is what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, it's very interesting you mentioned that. It just brought up a good point. I think one of the pain points here for adoption is you're right. Like, no, not enough people care about their privacy, and not enough people care about actually owning their data. They don't understand what they're missing out on. I mean, even if you lower it down to the most base level, like you can earn money for renting or selling your own data instead of giving something up for free that somebody's making billions, trillions of dollars off of, like the Googles of the world. They're a data company. Amazon's a data company, and it's crazy what we give up just with a click of a button without realizing what we're actually doing.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, people do care about like the earning monies, right? So that's why
Yeah,
deeping
yeah.
It's very
Monetizing
wild. I
layer.
think One of the interesting things that we've seen unfold specifically around DePin, because DePin happens to be extremely product focused, at least the direction it's going in. There are so many different persona types within Web3 industry or crypto. And there's so many reasons why different people get into crypto. I mean, there's a lot of triggers that might spark interest in people. Like me personally, I was thinking about data authenticity when I first learned about NFT technology, and that's what kind of got me into crypto back in 2018, 2019, I think. And so you have all of these different types of narratives that are floating around within this industry, and you have this like monetization incentive layer. You have like that social or community aspect layer. You have that data privacy layer where people can like they can grasp the concept of something good that should benefit humanity culturally. But I think what's really driving things forward, because a lot of speculation around these digital assets is kind of dying out, is the product layer and the value that's coming from the product layer. And so you have all these deep in networks, and what they're essentially doing is like they're creating these little micro economies to try and improve existing product experiences for people. You talk about like what you guys are doing with IoTeX. Like you guys are working with like mobility providers. You guys are working with like data networks for agriculture,
Mhm.
logistics, all these different types of like little micro industries or micro economies. And the value that people are getting is specifically from like interacting with those products because it benefits their life because they happen to live in that world or work in that world. And I think that's like the maybe the best direction that crypto needs to go in. We talk a lot about like product focused utilities and product focused token economies, but is that kind of what you see as far as like the evolution of this DePin narrative? Because I know DePin as a narrative started like maybe a year or a year and a half ago, and
Mhm.
everyone started jumping on DePin, but they don't really know what it is. Like they don't know what it's
Yeah.
used for. It's just like the hottest thing.
Yeah, that's very true. I think we are kind of like co-determining this term with Masari. At the very beginning, we call this like a machine phi. At that time, there are like different sort of names. There are H phi, some like five or six of the names. Then Masari says, okay, let's all call this deeping. Then we say, okay, let's call it deeping, right? Because you guys are meteor, you guys have a big mouth. So yeah, we love deeping too, by the way. So let's just go for deeping, right? That's the origin of where the deeping basically. But I think you're right. After being seeing like so many deepin projects on the market, I feel like the most successful deepin project are the ones that's really focused on like a very niche market, right? So instead of saying, oh, I'm doing like a deepin kind of network, so I will do all the 5G in US or somewhere else, it's more about okay, so I will do like a mobile deepin project where I can cover maybe some areas where AT&T, which is like a major kind of telecom company here in US, cannot provide coverage, right? Basically, like I'm filling the hole in their coverage map. And we did see like a lot of kind of 5G kind of deepin projects being successful here. And another example is like a GeoDNet, right? So instead of like doing like a GPS as a service for all the devices, for all the phones, they would say, okay, let's do this thing called RTK, which is like a high definition, high precision of the GPS. It has a very niche market, right? If you think about, except for military use, why would you need such like a high precision GPS location for a device, right? So there are some agricultural use cases, there are some other kind of civilian use cases, but still very niche market. So they're kind of doing like this, like a, you know, device deployment here and there, so they can provide this high precision, like a GPS devices. Qualu is another example. Actually, you guys invest into Qualu, right?
Yep.
Um, I think what they're doing is pretty meaningful. So they're setting up like the boxes in the whole world, trying to diagnose like the internet. Oh, maybe here is kind of like slow in some sort of coverage. It's still kind of filling the whole sort of idea. I feel like deep in projects along this way has the best chance to succeed so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to agree with that. And you made an interesting point. I feel bad for insulting the word deepin now that you guys, now knowing that you co-created that word. But
Oh yeah, same.
do you think deepin's like the most adequate way to describe what space you're working on right now? Because we've seen plenty of projects that are neither decentralized nor do they have any instance of hardware or physical infrastructure. So
Oh, first hot take.
we know that you know the crypto space. You've been in it even longer than
Yeah.
us, so you know that we have this proclivity for jumping on trends. Whatever's hot, you ride the hot hand, and then you raise funds off the back of it. But yeah, I just wanted to pick your brain on that. Like, what do you think about all these projects masquerading as DePin? A lot of them are very centralized. They're software companies, but they are proud to say that they're DePin, and they raise money for being a DePin project. Even from some VCs that are heavily involved in the DePin space, they're getting investment from them, and nobody's really talking about how very few of these projects are actually DePin.
Yeah. Um, I honestly I think it's fine, right? It's just about we are at the early stage of this entire deeping or whatever you call
Hmm.
this sector. So like the definition is not 100% clear. So
Yeah.
there's a reason why it's not clear is because there's so many things that people are still trying to figure out. One thing is how can we, like you said, right? So how can we make the entire thing like a more kind of decentralized,
Hmm.
not running by just one company, right? Another thing is how do we kind of make sure we can figure out the PMF product market fit relatively easy without just deploying 100 like a 1 million devices in the world and figure out, oh, this is kind of useless, right? So let's do another network. Another one is like a hardware is another kind of pain in the ass right now.
Yeah.
Is they spend 6 months, 1 year to do hardware, then deploy to just like a few thousand users in another year or two. Grow very very slow. Why we know like crypto cycle is every 4 years, right? So that means like within one cycle, there's just very few deeping projects. So that's all the problems we are facing right now. So that's why I'm fine. Like everybody, they call themselves deeping. I'm just like a have my finger crossed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good
Didn't
point
expect that
too.
answer.
The physical hardware. I've seen Sasha and I have both seen a lot of VCs reject DePin projects, especially like Qualu. I think had some trouble because they had some questions, legitimate questions about being able to manufacture and distribute physical stuff because that's not something crypto companies are usually familiar with. We're working mostly in software or in an online capacity, but actually having the ability to build and manufacture and distribute hardware or nodes, like actual physical nodes, and not like blockchain nodes.
Right.
It's an interesting point. Like you have to have a lot of trust for a company to be able to do that while also building out applications and the blockchain infrastructure.
Yeah, I think the deeping, that's why like every deeping project is kind of like a slow, right? Because it involves like another maybe two or three roles. One role is manufacturer, so they have to work with the manufacturer, to kind of manufacture the boxes, then trying to sell the boxes to people. And there's another role, it's called deployer. So that's I think Mycelium, Smartland, they're just deployers. They're just like grabbing whatever device they can buy from the market, deploy to their kind of house or like a land, trying to provide some local kind of coverage for that deeping project. Of course, miner is another role, right? So they have like an individual setting up antenna on the roof, doing here and there, maybe buy a device installed in the car. So there are just like so many like stakeholders, a few more stakeholders in the entire ecosystem that makes it like a really slow to move the ball.
Hmm. In that sense, it looks way more like compared to a lot of Web3 startups. It looks more of like a traditional company, and so like an infrastructure company. I think a lot of times we see deep in projects with physical hardware networks, and we refer to them as technology companies. They're not so focused on being some Web3 company and taking that like Web3 route on the business development and the marketing, etc. It's more about, like I mentioned before, that product focus. And it's funny that you mentioned Qualu. I think Carmelo and I had, a fun journey into the world of DePin with Qualu and a couple other projects in our portfolio. We designed the token economy for Qualu and we incubated them, and it was really exciting getting to have all of those unique conversations around the different business focus areas, not only the user mobile application, but then the B2B data enterprise side, the physical hardware rollout, logistics, and all of this stuff. And then finally, the economic layer, which we had a hand in helping develop. And that was one sort of like light bulb moment for us where we realized like the true value in DePin, or what we refer to as DePin now. And it's something I think many people kind of missed when DePin started becoming popular as a narrative. What maybe they failed to understand, and I would love your opinion on this, is that the idea of creating a network that relies on a decentralized, group or community of people, like everyday people, to source data or information or consensus and then create value on some other side, like some B2B enterprise side. Does that bring more accountability into the Web3 infrastructure? Because they need to actually funnel value from this enterprise side back into their user network in order for the whole thing to work. Do you
Mhm.
think that brings more accountability than what we might see in some Web3 startups that claim they're going to have like buybacks or burns or all this degen stuff, but maybe none of it happens because they run into some financial hardship?
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good point. I do think so, right? So we see this problem like a pretty common in the early stage DePin projects. That means like their device deployment doesn't have like enough quality and the density. That means like a data that produce just junk. So no one will buy the data, right? But to deploy more devices on the ground, they have to spend more tokens basically. Then the token price will drive down because a lot of people just mine a token every day, sell the token on the market. So there is a sort of like a window. So they have to, reach like a certain density of the devices within this time window per se to make it like useful. So even though, right, so even they have like this like a deployment density, then they have also to work on the solution layer. That's another kind of thinking I was having right now is like the data produced, let's say, are mostly useless, right? So they have to like process the data in a way to make it like a product or a solution. Then they hire a bunch of kind of sales guys go to kind of knock on the door for each of the enterprise companies. Says, "Oh, do you need the data, the weather data, for example?" We actually invest into like a weather project. It's called Nubila. It's in such a case, right? So weather data, no one really cares. But you have to produce something out of the weather data, let's say weather derivative or something like that. Then they can just like sell that part. So this is another kind of very big layer, the solution layer. I don't think a lot of Web3 teams have the expertise here.
100%. Yeah, and that's why a big part of our focus has been like in the instance of Kualu, going back to them again, like we didn't fully understand what they were working with the first few times we spoke to them, but we trusted their experience in the telecoms industry. They've been working for several decades, and they needed help in the Web3 space, but we were there to help guide them on that and some of their other advisors. But they knew telecoms in and out, and we learned a great deal about telecoms and all the pain points. And I think you're right. You kind of have to like attach it to the financial side of things. You need
Right.
That's the only language that a lot of these companies, and in this case governments, are willing to speak. Like if you can show them how much money they're losing each hour, each day, each year on bad internet, for example, they
Mhm.
don't need to know the ins and outs. They don't need to go to university and study telecoms. They just need to understand how much money they're losing. And then
Right.
I was thinking about this as well the other day. Like my girlfriend, she was sick and she had to go to the doctor, and then they just gave her a list of her results, and then they didn't bother to schedule a follow up. And then I thought how useless data actually is if you don't know how to read it and you don't know how to make insights from it or analyze it. So you need
Mhm.
that professional expertise. So not just sourcing the data and then paying the users for sourcing it, but being able to translate it and putting it into layman's terms so that governments, telecom companies, enterprises, and regular people need to actually make changes and implement changes to improve their situation.
That's very true, right? So, interesting, like a fact here is most of the DePin founders, so they are older in terms of like age compared to crypto, like the founders, to be honest, right? So usually, like they're expert in their domain, Web2 domain, like an energy, healthcare, car, whatever, right? So they're expert over there, but they lack the expertise in the token side. Maybe you guys have done a good job, help them with like a token design. We do some of those things with our portfolio company too. I think that's a good combination for thinking about how a deepin project should be structured. But sometimes I can feel like the conflict, right? So because they're coming from Web 2 world, like also like older in age, so they have like a relatively like a conservative mindset compared to like crypto people. They are very like a radical, like a liberal per se, right? So they want to pursue something like a crazy. So there is some conflict sometimes that also slowing down the development of deepin projects.
Man, that's so interesting. I never really thought of that until you mentioned a lot of teams that I met in this world of IoT or DePin are a little bit more a little older. They have more tenure within industries outside of Web3. And funny enough, that's the kind of the sweet spot that Carmelo and I consider, especially when working with teams. It's understanding that like the expertise that they have in identifying and solving all these other problems, and then they just need a little bit of help designing a lot of like the Web3 infrastructure and how it can help solve those problems. And in that sense, IoTeX is an incredibly strong incubator because you guys get exposure into like virtually every industry globally, and you guys have this powerful infrastructure and tool set. And I want to go back to the idea of the data insights and the data analytics. One conversation that we had with some people on your team in Singapore was the efforts that you're putting into creating some of these analytics tools, especially around, I believe, IoTeX Explorer, where you guys recognize quite early on there are all
DePin
these
scan, I think
teams.
DePin-scan.io. That's perhaps what you're referring to.
Deep in scan. I'm sorry, yeah, deep in
Exactly.
scan. And so recognizing that there are all these different networks that they create all of this extremely valuable data, but there's still a hurdle in getting across the bridge where you have these experts that know the problems, and then you have the solution that they want to achieve, but then you have to figure out like how to use this data to cross that bridge. And so if you don't mind, give us a bit of an idea of like how that development's been going and what that future vision around DePin scan and the tools that you guys are creating looks like,
Oh,
because ultimately it can be like a never-ending journey of you guys building out like data analytics infrastructure for an entire emerging industry.
Our world is powered by billions of smart devices that generate an incredible amount of data and value. This phenomenon is called the Internet of Things, or IoT. From smart homes and wearables to connected vehicles and renewable energy, the IoT is impacting everyone and everything. But today, the multi-trillion-dollar IoT industry is owned by centralized corporations that control our devices, mine our data, and earn huge profits with no value returned to users. IoTeX is here to change the status quo and build a future that empowers users, not corporations. We envision a world where everyday people can own and control their devices, as well as the data and value they generate. A vision we call the Internet of Trusted Things. By connecting the physical and digital worlds, IoTeX allows us to secure the data from billions of smart devices and extract value from it with next-gen DApps. Join IoTeX as we democratize access to the new machine economy and return power to the
yeah, that's a
people.
really good question. All right. So IoTeX, we started back in 2017 as sort of like a IoT focused layer one EVM chain. The chain has been like a built ground up, has been running for years, no problem. Like that's IoTeX layer one is still one of the fattest chains actually in the world for now. But starting from 2022, so we're kind of like a reposition ourselves more into like a deepen layer for all chains, sort of like a position, because we see most of the deeping, right? So in terms like a technology, are actually happening off the chain. Like the on-chain part is any like a very small portion of like an entire journey. If you think about, from the user, from the device, from data kind of processing, off the chain storage, indexing, analytics, then like finally maybe just like a final like a validated proof that goes to the chain that triggers the token distribution, right? So that's why we're kind of working on this more working on this off-chain structure. We have this white paper called IoTeX 2.0, which has been launched like almost 2 months ago. That's talking about like the entire repositioning of IoTeX. Of course, our layer was still over there, kind of running perfectly, but we're mostly working on this off-chain compute network. That's another big network we're going to launch next year. We're working on IOID, which is like an identity layer, trying to abstract away all the complexity of the hardware, trying to accelerate the growth of the projects. But most importantly, so there are some public goods so we're working on. So deepin scan is such a public good, right? So we never charge people for this one, but we do want to have like a sort of a landing page for deepin. That means like you have a lot of devices coming from different projects, where they are, what they're doing, and also like the token projects, their token price for the miners, how much they can mine the tokens, all those things we want to make it useful for people, right? So then more people will naturally come here to understand, oh, what is Deepin, what they're doing, why they're creating the value for the world. So that's kind of like one public good we're working on.
That's fantastic. Yeah, this infrastructure is so valuable, and what the progress that you guys are making is incredible. I've been loving following Qualu's journey and working with you guys, and they've mentioned to us, the identity solution and all this different types of tools that you guys are developing that are going to be ported into their infrastructure, and it just accelerates the development of their products so
Right.
much. So I love
So
hearing
our,
about this.
our
Thanks for sharing.
entire series like this, right? So what if we do the infra part right? So the projects like Qualu, like Nubila, like Network 3 or whatever, right? So they can go to market very quickly. So they can try out different ideas, find like the market fit relatively easy, then start have like a product revenue. That's where they can launch the token, value accrue some of the product revenue back to the token and list the token to make it super successful.
Yeah.
Otherwise, so they launch a token, right? So they kind of like distribute the token to different miners, while so they have like countdown basically, starting that starting from that point. Then there start to be a lot of infras, doing like the device distribution. So that takes a lot of time. Um, the network
Yeah.
will not be useful eventually. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the majority of promising DePin projects that we talk to are trying to tackle existing problems that, like the financial effects of those problems are in the millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or billions within massive industries. And so being able to go to market as quickly as possible is like the best thing to do. I completely agree there. One
Right.
thing I did want to ask you though, the idea of tokens being used as an incentive and then user conversion. And so when Carmelo and I design digital asset economies and token economies, we try and plan very carefully about how every token going out has some avenue to come back into the ecosystem, just for sustainability and scalability. And when you think of a token like this, we refer to it as an ecosystem asset. It's something that can be part of a loyalty or promotions program. It can
Mm.
help facilitate user journey. If you have a user that's in your ecosystem that's using one product that you believe this other product might benefit their lives, you can sort of use that as an incentive to funnel them that way, right? But in the sense of DePin, there's a lot of projects that simply use a token as an incentive layer. So they're just giving out the token in return for getting data back from some hardware devices or software devices. And it's very difficult for these teams to figure out what else can I offer these network contributors in exchange for those tokens back from like a product or a feature perspective. How important is that, in your opinion, for a DePin project to succeed?
I think that's a really good point, right? So they should spend the token very carefully, because at the very beginning, if they want to boost like let's say number of devices, just giving out more tokens is a very easy way to boost like a number of devices. And then they can claim, oh, network has been like have this like a crazy growth in the past 3 months, so they can go to VC to raise some money, right? But they have like a debt, basically debt to the community, debt to the miners, which they have to pay back at a certain point. Um, so that's not a easy way to for them to try out different things. So IoTeX, we are working with like a few like a projects, potentially Qualu, by the way, to have this dual mining kind of like a concept. That means like a IoTeX, we can offer them or grant them some IoTeX to kick off their network. So they don't have to distribute tokens to their like miners on day one, but they distribute like a IoTeX to those miners on day one, right? So they're earning IoTeX. They have a finance incentive to deploy the devices. They start a network, so the Qualu or another team can actually kick in and try out different ideas. Hopefully, that ideas works out. So that's like one thing we're doing, like experimenting with a few teams right now.
Ooh, I love that experiment. It sounds risky. What can they do with the IoTeX? What can they do with these tokens?
Our world is powered by billions of smart devices that generate an incredible amount of data and value. This phenomenon is called the Internet of Things, or IoT. From smart homes and wearables to connected vehicles and renewable energy, the IoT is impacting everyone and everything. But today, the multi-trillion-dollar IoT industry is owned by centralized corporations that control our devices, mine our data, and earn huge profits with no value returned to users. IoTeX is here to change the status quo and build a future that empowers users, not corporations. We envision a world where everyday people can own and control their devices, as well as the data and value they generate. a vision we call the Internet of Trusted Things. By connecting the physical and digital worlds, IoTeX allows us to secure the data from billions of smart devices and extract value from it with next-gen dApps. Join IoTeX as we democratize access to the new machine economy and return power to the people.
So yeah, so like as miners, I think their mindset is definitely like just trying to mine and sell, right, and cash out, right. So that's definitely like a downside for us. But we want to support like ecosystem projects, kind of like a build on top of us, because we're we're innovators, right. So we're trying something like no one have done before. But I do think giving them some like initial liquidity, so they can kind of initially grow their network without having this like a big debt on their side, would be something really helpful for them, because their token before they're listing on a good exchange almost worth nothing.
Hmm.
So they have to give a lot of tokens on, maybe to just like 100 miners, right? So that doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
great way of structuring a grant system, actually.
it makes sense too if you see a lot of your products as public good, like the DePin scanner. Like you're doing this for the greater good. You're doing this because you want to support the concept, the industry, the idea, and it's a good way to kind of it's like a Trojan horse to bring people into the IoTeX ecosystem too for more awareness and some of the other projects that you're working on or helping to build or incubate.
Right, right. That's
Yeah, and
true. So it's almost equivalent to if you know Google Cloud, Amazon Cloud.
yeah,
So
yeah,
they give like a startup like a credits, I don't know, 50K per year to use their kind of cloud products for free,
yeah.
right? But like the catch is here, okay, once they're on Google Cloud or Amazon Cloud, it's hard to migrate out.
You're
So same
addicted.
thing applies here, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then in that case, it doesn't. I mean, it costs them income, but it doesn't cost them actual value. Like they don't have to send anything out. They're just
Mhm.
giving credits. So even better for them. But yeah, Sasha mentioned the incubation program, and we wanted to talk to you about that because we have obviously a lot of questions on how you vet projects and who you choose to work with. So, could you run us through how you make that decision and how you have these conversations and who you ultimately accept into these cohorts? Because Deepin's
Yeah.
obviously a popular narrative right now. So, there's a lot of Deepin projects popping out of nowhere. And I imagine all of them or most of them want to work with IoTeX.
hmm Yeah, so we do have like an accelerator program. It's called DePin-Serve. Starting from almost maybe 20 months ago, right? If I remember correctly. So we have like a three cohorts. So each of them have like a roughly 10 projects, so 30-ish like in total. So we were putting some money into those projects. My team working very closely with those teams on a daily basis. So we are trying to trying to see which one will kind of like doing well, and we are going to double that. So I think we are running this one pretty successfully. We have like a few teams we are actually doubling down right now. Um, when it comes down to selecting like a deep in team, I think the first thing is about like the founders, right? So founders has to be energetic, super energetic, hungry for success, and kind of hustler. So they have to do whatever they have to do to get the project successful,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's
Green
number one
flag.
thing. Yeah, because ideas or like a products can change on a daily basis, right? This works, this doesn't work, but like a founder has to be the guy who always stay here, like, kind of fighting until the end of the day. So I think still people is the most important. Even their mindset, I would think about their mindset, right? So if they're coming from Web 2 world, can they be smart enough to kind of adapt themselves into the pace of crypto? Because we're kind of moving very fast here, while IoT or Web 2 is kind of very slow, right? Can
Yeah.
you do um, Usually we want to like a team have like a 2 to 3 co-founders, right? So each of them have like a one spatial like a skills in one perspective. Otherwise one guy, especially given Deepin has a larger scope compared to DeFi or NFT.
Hmm.
I think one founder is usually very hard to be successful, to be honest.
That's a really good point, actually. Sometimes Sasha and I, we invest in or we work with some teams with one founder, or maybe there's a hierarchy. There's some, you know, people that are lower in the hierarchy on the team, but there's only one founder, and we find it more easy to work with, two or
Mhm.
three or four co-founders as well, because there's a little bit more trust there that we know that there's different experience and skill sets.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I wanted to ask you too. We're going to ask you a little bit later on, but we know that there's three founders or co-founders for IoTeX. So
Yeah.
uh, I think this is a question that comes up a lot, especially with some of the founding teams that we work with or we talk to. But how do you identify somebody that you want to work with? How do you find a perfect co-founding match? Because it's hard to do. We spoke with somebody last week, the same question. It's really hard to do this on your own. So you need somebody you trust that has your back, that has a different complementary skill set that can help with build a company in another area.
Yeah, I think so too, right? So they have to kind of go along well with each other. At the same time, they have like a different like angles or models of thinking about the same problem, right? So which kind of compensate each other. I think that's kind of like a one way to go. Also, they have to like emotionally to be stable, right? So we saw some partners like kind of like going crazy. So that's not gonna be a good sign, for survival, especially in the today's crypto environment. Um,
Oh man, we're
yeah,
lacking that.
yeah. And also we want to the co-founders, they know each other, right? They have maybe done something like together before, so
Yeah.
that's not as like a strangers, made at a hackathon says, oh, let's do something together right now. That those relationship is kind of like a fragile in my opinion.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, and you brought up a few good points. Like, I have like a two-parter question, but one, you mentioned pivots, so you're right. Like crypto, we pivot really quickly, and that's sort of the expectation in this space. So, how important is it? I mean, you guys have pivoted a little bit, and you refocused your company, and you've been around for a long time, so it's clearly working for you guys. But how important is it when you are vetting a team that they know how to move quickly, they're agile, they listen to community feedback, they listen to investor feedback, and they know how to move in the right direction? Versus how do they, some companies pivot too much in crypto, they pivot every other day, and then they can't figure out their identity and they can't figure out who they want to be. So do you have any input or advice for teams on how much they should be pivoting? What's the right amount?
I still feel like the founder, right? So he or her, like the vision level should be kind of stable, right? So like the vision has been there forever, doesn't change. So what can be changed is like a strategy or tactics or like a concrete products. Maybe we do an NFT marketplace today, and maybe tomorrow we do a prediction market. That's fine,
Yep.
but still like the things like the dream he wants to achieve or she wants to achieve should stay there. Um, I see we saw some like teams that they're oversensitive to the crypto market, right? Because in the crypto market, every month you have a hot topic to
Yeah.
chase. Yeah, some people are just chasing hot topics. But yeah, we did the same too. Actually, when we were, maybe 2018, 2019, we actually also chasing hot topic. But later we found, okay, it doesn't worth it because once you're chasing the hot topic, you're like a not number one, number two, right? So maybe you're number 10 or number 20 in that hot topic. And
Yeah.
once you have done the job, the hot topic is already died down. The next hot topic actually pops up. You'll never be able to actually really like seize the moment. So that's why we change our strategy into, okay, let's just do this thing really really right, and we just put in all the resources and the people and the believer builders investors into here and trying to make it big. I feel like this strategy actually works better.
Yeah. So the founding vision remains the same, the end goal, but the strategy can shift a little bit. So you're not
Yeah,
pivoting the company vision that you started several years ago. That makes a lot of
exactly.
sense. And
Yeah,
I,
tactics can change. Like, for now, my team is someone's talking about the tall mini apps because it's hot. Everybody's doing tall mini apps. Yeah, maybe we can do this, to attract like more people to use DePin scan. That's a good idea, right?
yeah, and going back to the incubator context, like, do you find it hard to work with or invest in teams that are strictly Web3? Because Sasha and I, we meet and talk to and get pitched by a lot of teams that have never worked in any other industry before. They're strictly Web3, and like we said, the pace of pivots and how we jump onto narratives. So do you think it's easier to trust teams of 2 to 3 people that have worked in another industry before and they have complementary skill sets versus a few people that have just been in crypto for a few years and they think they have the next $1 billion idea?
I think a tracking
Those are
record
loaded
is maybe.
questions.
I think a tracking record, no matter Web two or Web three, is definitely something we should be looking at, right? So
Yeah.
if they're Web three, have you done something really really successful in the Web three world? Maybe
Hmm.
Web two the same. I think that really matters. And
That's
also like I sometimes ask a question, right? So why would you do this, right? So if you're coming from Google, Google pays you well, why would you do this? Right? So if you're coming from like a AV, you're it's a very successful lending protocol, why would you do another kind of different thing, right? So those you can find signals from those answers too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm. This is funny. It's like sometimes we get pitched like the 87th like DeFi lending protocol, and this like it's a loaded question there as well, asking the founder like, so was it your lifelong dream to launch the 87th DeFi lending protocol? I think our viewers know by now that I love this discussion around vision, and I completely agree with what you had mentioned. Like this is a huge red flag if you see a company that says like our vision is to connect like the world globally on an internet level, and then like some new narrative comes up, and then the vision suddenly changes. Like that's
No,
not
that
what
don't.
we're in this for. But in the sense, in the spirit of vision, and going back to that incubator that you were talking about, what's your take on some of these projects within your incubator cohorts, or even in the industry within DePin in general, collaborating and working together to pursue a common vision? Because when it comes to DePin specifically, we've
Mhm.
seen like dozens of projects whose vision is to like, I want to bring internet access to impoverished and marginalized areas. And although, like, they're all competing businesses, if they are
Right.
true to their vision, then they should be doing whatever they can to try and pursue that, even if it means merging or joining efforts or collaborating, sharing hardware, sharing data, etc.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. So I was actually talking this idea in Singapore with some folks, right? So we were talking about something called like a deepin interoperability. That means like maybe two very small deepin networks. So they should have a way to work together. Maybe one, learning device from one network to another one to do some job, or like this network maybe provide energy and maybe Wi-Fi to another network, right? So if we can enable this like interoperability or maybe composability, if you call it, that's fine too. For cross the DP networks, then we should be able to see like smarter structures to start like a DP projects. For example, right? So I was also I was always mentioning this like a Uber's city by city like a model. So if you think about Uber, it's like a global kind of taxi, like a hailing riding services, right? So, but why Uber is successful is because it has a very efficient structure. So in every city, so they have like a city, like an operation team, which will do a lot of work, localization, legal compliance, operation. But still, like a Uber, basically setting up the rule, it's like kind of like a DAO if you think about it, right? Then you have a different cities underneath. So why wouldn't Deepin work in this way if we're talking about like a global 5G network? I feel like this still applies to Deepin as well, right? To get there, so you have to like a kind of, it's like a cross chain sort of like an interaction between different like a DP networks should be, yeah. So that's why like so we're in the process of trying to coin a term called verifiable deeping. So our series, any if we can make this deeping each of them like a verifiable, so they will be able to exchange value, utility, so on and so forth.
Hmm. That's a really
That's
interesting concept. I think a lot of people in this industry, specifically people that are like we who would consider to be Web3, are largely greed driven and speculation driven. And so the idea of like there's only a limited number of customers when it comes to internet access globally, and so my business has an upper ceiling when it comes to revenue. So like that can maybe work against the idea of collaboration, but ultimately at the end of the day, like when these people in these incubation programs are showing you their pitch deck with like the market potential slide, we have $87 trillion market potential. Well, it sounds like there's more than enough to go around. Let's be honest.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
I think so too.
Speaking of collaboration, like we were at your event, obviously the IoTeX event in Singapore a few weeks ago, and it was a fantastic event. By the way, we had a blast there.
Thank
And on one of the panels, I think somebody from your team was, they mentioned the strategy for IoTeX because you guys have done a great job building your community, being inclusive, being early to the trend, obviously. But yeah, they were talking about, can't remember who it was, but they were talking about collaboration over competition and how it's important to not see the Solanas and the Peaks or the Ethereums as competitors, but figure out a way that you can work together to unseat the Ubers or the Googles, the companies you used to work for. That's really the companies that Web3 should set its sights on and try to disrupt and take down, or compete with at least, because there's too much infighting and there's too much people trying to make their money. And if you're really truly dedicated to the vision, then you got to work together. You got to build some interoperable protocols and build some public goods
you.
as well.
Yeah. So if we're thinking about general purpose layer one, layer two, so So there are a lot of competition, right? Why? Because they are mostly competing for the money and attention, which has a which are very liquid basically assets, right? So money can flow from this chain to another chain relatively easy. But if you think about deeping, so deeping is very regional or maybe functional kind of focus. So maybe there's like a region, so some deeping project we're doing really, really well. So that's why we reposition ourselves into a more kind of like a deeping layer for all the chain type of position, no matter it's Solana, Ethereum. So we work with Polygon a lot recently. So we have like an announcement with Sandeep, me and Sandeep actually during the Singapore event. So definitely like we're trying to help more on the Polygon deeping project side as well. So yeah, I totally agree with you guys. So it's not about time about fighting for the same
Yeah,
thing. We should like together making like the pie bigger.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. I think that was the one of the talks we saw you speaking with Sandeep from Polygon, and it was a really good discussion. And
Mm.
it's exciting that you're working with these chains and not, IoTeX is a very not niche is not the right word, but it's a very specialized layer one. So you're working in a specific area. So there's no need to compete. There's more than enough to go around for everybody.
That's right.
Mm. I've got in that same breath, I've got like a bit of a crazy question for you, and it goes back to Qualu. In fact, we interviewed Keith on the Boom Room a little while back to try and bring some more awareness for our viewers about what they're doing and the importance. And as we dove deeper into the conversation, it became more and more obvious like how disruptive what they are building potentially is. And like I mentioned before, we worked on designing the digital asset economy and the business model, and we got to see firsthand like the ridiculous numbers when it comes to the revenue potential and the income potential here. And in that conversation with Keith, we the direction kind of went in like disrupting not only entire companies but entire industries, potentially even destroying industries with what they're building, making it obsolete. And in that conversation, we told him like we're kind of worried for your well-being. Like, maybe do you have like a life insurance policy? And so I wanted to ask you, like, how worried are you for some of the founders in the IoTeX network based on how disruptive their technologies are? Do do they have targets on their backs? Do you think they're going to be? Do you think the Googles and the Ubers are going to come after them?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we're getting onto that level yet, right? So if you're working on like a military deeping, yes, so there is like a certain threat to your life. If you control, I don't know, like a thousands of like drawings, so you can mostly like, kill everybody if you want to. So that's like a dangerous one. But I think for now, most of the deepings are still like a too small. I don't think Google even care or know about them, to be honest.
It's a good point.
Yeah,
Okay, I can sleep sound now.
for sure.
And I think I wanted to ask this before. We touched on it briefly because obviously you have an impressive work experience working with Google and Uber. But this is also an interesting question I like to ask people like yourself. What are the biggest main differences, both working in Web3 and traditional tech industry? And also, like, obviously you decided to start IoTeX several years ago and you wanted to go out on your own and do something and, not just work for somebody, but you wanted to work towards your own vision and do something that you're passionate about. So what has that been like, and how does it feel several years later to see how this has evolved? Like we said, you've survived multiple cycles, which is no easy feat in crypto. Like, a lot of companies go under and they can't survive the bear market.
No, it's very different, right? So big corporation is all about politics. Of course, they have a great people, like a great technology, but maybe they have just too many smart guys.
Yeah.
So internally, those big companies just like politics, right? So inside, you
Yeah.
can really not do too much, but yeah, that pays you well. So that's no complaints about that. I feel like crypto. I made the decision like 7 years back, jump into crypto.
Hmm.
I feel like that's still the right decision, I think, right now. So I got so much fun here, right? So I work with fun people. I talking with different people every day, like you guys do as well. So learn like different ideas and thoughts, and saw like an entire like a movement of the entire industry. So we're trying here, we're trying DeFi so hard, we're trying NFT so hard, we're trying game so hard, we're doing deeping right now. So this is very interesting, right? Basically says how the human, the society, the technology actually like evolves. It's not too easy, to be honest. We have to figure out so many complicated stuff underneath. But I feel like that basically worth my time to thinking, right? Because I feel like I'm a smart guy. I love philosophy, by the way. So I want to see how the philosophy can actually apply to the real world, or what type of philosophy I can abstract, from what I have been like went through, like the experience here. So yeah, I have so much takeaways from being in crypto in the past few years. I feel I'm a lucky guy.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. Like trying to infuse different disciplines like philosophy and psychology into creating and bootstrapping these infrastructure systems. And it's interesting because I don't hear a lot of people talking about it like that. I think
Yeah,
we've, like you said before, since finance has become more and more involved, we're moving away from the original ethos of crypto, and it's becoming less about the security or the privacy or the decentralization, and more about it's just a new way to make money, which is a little bit sad, but I think that's just the nature in capitalism. That's how it works. The money flows in, and then it determines the direction.
right, right. I don't know. I'm still sometimes argue with myself, right? Crypto right now is very finance focused. Is that because like the design of EVM, which is pretty weak virtual machine that can only do some token stuff, right?
Yeah.
What if we have a very strong like a VM, let's say Solana VM or some other sort of VM? Can we do something like a fundamentally different? Can we build like a Uber, entirely on chain, without borrowing the off chain compute part, right? So that's sometimes I ask myself, and I do think there is a possibility here.
Yeah, baby steps, huh? Like little
Baby
by
step.
little, we're seeing things improve. And funny enough, I think this second half of 2024 haven't seen so much development from the Ethereum Foundation or any foundation in general, as far as like new smart contract infrastructures,
Mm.
like major milestones. But hopefully towards the beginning of next year, we see some more. But this industry is always moving forward. I think with that, we've got to wrap it up. And Raullen, I really want to thank you for taking the time to come on board. But we have one last segment question that we're gonna ask you. We ask all of our Boom Room attendees. And before we
Yeah.
get to that, I want to remind everyone, if you guys enjoy this content, make sure you tap that like button, throw us a follow. We've got some more interviews coming out. If you're interested at all in IoTeX and learning more about Raullen, make sure you check out the link in the show notes. We're going to post everything there. And Raullen, actually, before we dive into the last segment, give us a bit of an update on what's happening, the latest news with IoTeX. What are some updates coming out? What are things that people can be excited about?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I think we just wrap up this flagship event in Singapore about DePin, right? So super successful. 1,000 people showed up in this like a 2-day event. So investors, builders, DePin projects. So we're pretty proud of that. And in terms like what's coming up for IoTeX, so we're in the preparation for like a really two big product launch. So
Mm.
one is around this identity system, and the one is around this off-chain compute networks. To give like them a huge success or boost, so we will do like a huge campaign. Keep your guys like eyes, stay tuned for that. So this will be a huge campaign. So definitely like we're working with like a uh, top notch KOLs, top notch like the CEX to make it like a really impactful.
Oh,
Yeah, Q4 will be shining.
sounds exciting. I'm
Yeah,
going to definitely be staying tuned for that.
yeah.
Yeah, that benefits every project in the IoTeX ecosystem. So that's super
Mhm.
cool. And then, yeah, so let's get to our last segment and wrap it up. Carmelo, you want to take it away with this very special one?
Yeah, so we start every episode and we end it the same way. We always want to ask, what are you most bullish about in the next several months? Obviously, it can't be MachineFi or it can't be IoTeX because we know that you're bullish on that. But any people, teams, products, areas, anything, what are you most excited about in the next, let's say, 6 months?
6 months from now, right? So yeah, I think entirely. So we are on the way to the bull market, right? So you see like the Fed rate cut in a few days, even China. So they are kind of like doing the QE right now.
Oh, yeah.
Um, So I feel like the micro environment is getting a little bit better. So definitely like I'm expecting to see the boom market. In terms like what I would be excited about, I feel like except dipping, the Bitcoin ecosystem is really interesting too. So, but not like the Bitcoin layer twos right now. So I feel like there must be a different way to do like a Bitcoin like an ecosystem fundamentally from just doing a layer two. So this is
Yeah,
something I'm also watching for.
that's interesting. Yeah, I remember in the beginning of the year, everybody was crazy about. There was like 700 Bitcoin layer twos. People were trying to get us to invest in, and now I don't hear anything about them. I think they just all disappeared overnight. So, I
Yeah.
think you're right, though. We had an interesting discussion with somebody, I can't remember who, but for Bitcoin to survive long term, it's going to need to keep incentivizing miners to keep hashing. So you're one of the ways you can do that is creating different layers aside from the main economic layer, the settlement layer, like creating other financial activity on Bitcoin somehow with layers so that
Mhm.
you can incentivize people with transaction fees instead of just the regular mining. So like it's really interesting, and I think that we're going to need to readdress this, and maybe it's going to pop its head back up next year again. But yeah, I am astounded that it just kind of disappeared overnight. In January, February, everything was Bitcoin layer.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very true.
BRC20s. That's such an OG answer from Raullen.
He's
Yeah,
been in it
yeah,
for a
I
long
love
time.
Bitcoin. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
Bitcoin. I love Ethereum too. Yeah, but I feel like
Mm.
Ethereum is a kind of, you know, it's a growth pain, right? So if you think about it, it's a startup company, right? Then it's a growth pain for Ethereum. So they have to figure out a way,
Yeah.
basically, try to drive more demand users, applications, using the current infrastructure.
Yeah, yeah. Moving slow, but hopefully forward. Well, again, Raullen, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to speak with you. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on the Boom Room. And
For
for
sure.
all our users, check out the show notes below, learn more about them. And until then, stay safe, everyone. Thanks again, brother.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. Thank you.
Have
Ciao,
a good one.
y'all.
Woo.